When I asked when the wedding was, she looked at me and said, "We got married yesterday." The words hit me like a cold gust through an open window in winter. My hands froze around the teacup, the steam curling up and blurring my vision as if the world itself were hiding something from me. I had thought I knew my son. I had thought I knew his life. And yet, here was this woman, my daughter-in-law, smiling gently, like nothing had happened, like the entire world hadn't just shifted beneath my feet. I sank slowly into the armchair by the window, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the distant bark of a dog from down the street. Normal life, ordinary life, was still happening around me, indifferent to the shock I felt inside. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to steady my racing heart. "Yesterday?" I whispered, more to myself than to her. "You married him yesterday?" She nodded, eyes careful, voice calm. "Yes. I know this is sudden for you, but everything was private. We wanted it that way." There was a polite firmness in her tone, but I couldn't read it, couldn't place her expression. Was it confidence? Guilt? I didn't know. And yet, her words left an icy taste in my mouth, a bitter layer I couldn't swallow. Our home had always been warm. The smell of freshly baked bread in the morning, my husband's laughter echoing down the hall, the soft murmur of my son playing piano in the corner of the living room. I had imagined him growing up surrounded by family traditions, small routines that tethered him to the world we had built together. And now, this. A sudden secret marriage, a life decision made behind closed doors, leaving me feeling like an outsider in my own family. I remembered the day my son first introduced her. She had smiled, timid but bright, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she claimed she had picked herself. There had been an instant warmth, a sense that she would fit, that she would nurture our son's happiness without trampling our lives. How naive I had been. My heart had opened for her, believing she was part of our story, part of the daily rhythm of home, the clatter of dishes after dinner, the hum of the washing machine at night, the shared cups of tea at the kitchen table. Now, all that seemed fragile, almost irrelevant. I couldn't remember the last time she had come to me for advice, or shared a story, or even smiled with genuine warmth. Instead, there had been silence, carefully measured, an invisible line she had drawn between us without my noticing. And now she had crossed it, irrevocably, without warning, without consent, without the small courtesies of the world I believed we lived in. I looked at her again, sitting there so calmly, as if she hadn't just upended my sense of reality. I wanted to be angry, to shout, to demand why, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I found myself noticing the little things, the way her fingers rested on her lap, the faint scent of jasmine perfume, the quiet steadiness of her gaze. These ordinary details, usually comforting, now felt like markers of betrayal, symbols of a secret life I had no part in. For a long moment, the kitchen clock ticked on. Steam from my teacup rose and twisted into the air. I felt suspended, caught between disbelief and heartbreak, trying to grasp the reality of her words. How had I missed it? How had my son kept this from me? And, most terrifyingly, how had I not seen the truth hiding in plain sight, beneath our shared dinners, beneath my son's smiles, beneath the ordinary hum of daily life? I took a deep breath, trying to summon calm. But inside, a storm had begun, a quiet, relentless questioning that would not let me rest. And I knew, deep down, that this moment, this revelation, was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke with a dull ache behind my eyes, like the lingering weight of something I couldn't yet name. The house smelled faintly of coffee and toast, ordinary and comforting, but it did nothing to ease the tension in my chest. My husband was humming in the kitchen, the rhythm of his movements almost mocking in its normalcy. He didn't know. Or maybe he did, and like everyone else, had chosen silence. I made myself a cup of tea, watching the steam curl lazily into the air, and tried to recall the past week, the past month, the past year. Had there been signs? Little slips, fleeting comments, hurried texts, moments where I had felt an unfamiliar distance in my son's voice? I searched my memory with a sort of desperate precision, piecing together fragments, tiny puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. I remembered her calls, brief and polite, always during moments when I was busy, always leaving me with a vague unease I had shrugged off. Breakfast was quiet. My son, unaware of the turmoil I carried, chatted about work, about his piano practice, about a project he was excited to finish. And I, sitting across from him, felt like a spectator, watching a life I thought I shared but suddenly realized I didn't. The words I wanted to say, "Why didn't you tell me?" stuck somewhere in my throat. They felt too heavy, too accusatory, too final. Later, when she came out of the kitchen, I tried to meet her gaze, to search for any crack in the calm facade she wore. But she met my eyes with the same gentle composure, the same controlled smile, as if she hadn't just dropped a secret that should have shattered me. She was wearing a light pink blouse that smelled faintly of lavender, and I noticed the neat curl of her hair, the way she tucked it behind her ear, almost rehearsed. Every small detail felt deliberate, as though she knew exactly how to maintain her innocence while concealing the truth. I spent the day wandering through the house, moving from room to room, tracing the patterns of my life with a new, wary awareness. The piano keys felt heavier under my fingertips, the walls closer, the rooms smaller, as though the house itself had shifted around this revelation. I listened to the muffled laughter from my son's bedroom, the rhythmic tapping of his fingers on the desk, and I realized that everything, every ordinary sound, every familiar smell, had taken on a different meaning. And then, the first clue appeared. It was subtle, almost innocuous, a small, folded envelope left on the kitchen counter. My name was written on it in her neat handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up, the paper crisp under my fingers. Inside, there was a short note, "I hope we can talk soon. I didn't mean to shock you. I just wanted to start our life quietly." Quietly. The word lingered, sharp and bitter. Quietly. She had made a life-altering decision in secrecy, thinking she could manage the fallout with a few words on a scrap of paper. My pulse quickened, anger and disbelief mingling with the sadness I couldn't shake. How could someone take something so sacred, my son, my family, the rhythm of our lives, and transform it without warning? That evening, I tried to speak with my son, gently, hoping for an explanation. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice low, almost breaking. He looked startled, caught mid-gesture, and shrugged, an uneasy smile flickering across his face. "Mom, I didn't think it mattered. We were happy, and it happened fast. I didn't want to make a big deal." The words stung. Happily, secretly, quietly, they were not my son's words, they belonged to someone else, someone who had quietly carved a space in his life and left me outside, watching from a distance. My heart ached for him, yes, but more than that, it ached for the trust that had been quietly dismantled, piece by piece, until all that remained was this hollow space between us. I realized then that this was not just a simple surprise. It was the first real fracture, the first subtle tremor before the landslide. And I had no idea how deep it would go. In the days that followed, I found myself watching her more closely, unable to stop the subtle surveillance that my heart demanded. I tried to convince myself it wasn't personal, that it wasn't suspicion, it was just curiosity. But deep down, I knew it was something sharper. A quiet unease had settled over the house, like a fog that refused to lift. She moved through the rooms with the same soft grace as before, but there was now a tension in her movements, a slight hesitation in the way she held herself, as if she were balancing on the edge of something. She would laugh at my son's jokes, but sometimes her laughter would falter for a fraction of a second, and I caught it. I noticed how she seemed to check her phone just a little too often, how she avoided my gaze when I asked casual questions about her day. The first real clue arrived on an ordinary afternoon. I was folding laundry in the hallway when I overheard her speaking in a hushed tone to someone on the phone. Her words were careful, measured, a soft melody of secrecy. I couldn't make out everything, but a few fragments pricked my skin like tiny needles. "Didn't tell her yet, just keep it quiet, we had to do it yesterday." I froze, the laundry slipping from my hands, and pressed my ear closer. My heart thudded violently in my chest. There it was, the confirmation of what I had been fearing. This wasn't just a secret marriage kept from me, it was a carefully orchestrated plan, carried out with precision and thought. My daughter-in-law had maneuvered through our lives, polite, charming, invisible in her intentions, until the moment she wanted came. I wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers, to shake her gently until she admitted the truth. But something held me back, a deep, steadying awareness that my reaction needed to be controlled. I couldn't let anger dictate my actions. Not yet. Not until I understood the full picture. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to the small things I had ignored before. The receipts that didn't match our usual shopping, the little notes that seemed hastily erased, the way she would smile at me with just enough warmth to disarm suspicion. Each tiny detail piled on top of the last, a mosaic of deliberate choices, forming a pattern that had been invisible until I started to look. At night, I lay awake in my bedroom, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the wind brushing against the window. My mind replayed every interaction, every smile, every word exchanged over the past months. Had I been blind? Or had I simply refused to see? The thought gnawed at me relentlessly. I loved my son with all my heart, and yet, with every passing day, I felt an unfamiliar distance growing between us. He wasn't the one acting in secret, he was caught in her plan, perhaps too trusting, perhaps too naive to see the truth behind her eyes. The subtle tension became unbearable one afternoon. She had asked me to help with a small household task, a simple, ordinary favor, and I agreed, trying to mask the storm inside me. As we worked side by side, I watched the way she moved, the tilt of her head, the careful calculation in her gestures. My hands shook slightly as I set down the dishes, my mind racing. I needed clarity, a confrontation, a reckoning, but I also needed evidence, something undeniable that would make the truth irrefutable. And then, in that quiet, mundane moment, I realized this was no ordinary family tension. This was a betrayal, subtle at first, but deliberate. It wasn't just about secrecy, it was about control, about shaping our lives without regard for the people whose world she had entered. And the realization cut deep, like a sharp wind through an open door. I knew, in that instant, that the calm, ordinary life I had cherished was gone. The quiet, the laughter, the routine, they were all veneers now, hiding something far more fragile, far more dangerous than I had imagined. And if I wanted to protect my son, my family, and myself, I would have to act carefully, patiently, and with the quiet precision she had used to unravel us. The truth revealed itself in a way I could never have anticipated, sudden, raw, and almost cruel in its clarity. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or an explosive confession. It was a slip, a moment of carelessness that left her defenses bare, like a single candle flickering in a dark room. I had been cleaning the living room one quiet afternoon when I noticed a small envelope sticking out from beneath the couch cushions. My fingers hesitated over it, and yet some invisible force compelled me to pick it up. The handwriting was unfamiliar, not hers, not my son's, but the contents inside made my heart pound as if it were trying to escape my chest. There were photographs, taken secretly, images of my son and her exchanging vows in a small, intimate ceremony. I could see the rings on their fingers, the subtle blush on his cheeks, the sly, triumphant smile she wore. And then, tucked among the photos, were messages, text conversations, hurried and urgent, between her and someone else, plotting, coordinating, ensuring that no one knew, ensuring that their secret remained intact. I felt the air leave my lungs. I stumbled backward, clutching the envelope to my chest as though it could shield me from the reality I now faced. My hands shook, my vision blurred. How had I missed this? How had I allowed someone to orchestrate a life-altering event behind my back without a single clue until this very moment? When I finally confronted her, my voice was quiet but unyielding, carrying the weight of every sleepless night, every unasked question, every small betrayal I had sensed but couldn't name. Why? I asked, the word trembling in the air between us. Why did you do this behind our backs? Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, and then she quickly masked the shock with composure. I didn't want to hurt anyone, she said, her voice almost gentle. We wanted to start quietly. It wasn't meant to be a betrayal. Her words felt hollow, thin as tissue paper against the pounding truth of what I held in my hands. I could feel my chest tighten, a physical ache that mirrored the emotional fracture inside me. Quietly? I repeated, disbelief sharpening each syllable. You call hiding a marriage from your family, quietly? She looked down, the carefully constructed facade faltering ever so slightly. I just wanted him to be happy. And I thought if I did this carefully, everything would fall into place without pain. But the pain is already here, I said, my voice breaking. It's here in the way I feel betrayed, in the way your secrecy has shaken my son, in the way our home, our family, feels suddenly fragile, like it could collapse at any moment. Happiness built on secrecy is fragile. And now we all pay the price. She swallowed, tears glinting in her eyes, but still, she did not apologize in a way that felt complete, did not acknowledge the depth of what she had done. I realized then that this was the real betrayal, not the secrecy itself, but the disregard for the emotional lives entwined with theirs. My son's trust, my own heart, the rhythm of daily life, all treated as secondary to her desire to control the narrative. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the envelope with its photos and texts spread out before me. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of the dog, the faint scent of jasmine in the air, all these ordinary sounds mocked the fracture in our lives. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and rapid, and yet, amidst the heartbreak, a quiet clarity began to form. I had a choice: let this deceit erode our family further, let it fester into resentment and silent distance, or act, carefully, strategically, with the precision this situation demanded. And deep down, I knew that action had to come not from anger alone, but from a desire to restore balance, to protect what mattered most, and to ensure that the consequences of this betrayal were neither ignored nor dismissed. The next morning, I moved with a quiet determination I hadn't known I possessed. The ache in my chest had transformed into a sharp focus. I wasn't going to let this secret, this betrayal, continue unchecked. But I knew I had to be careful. My son's happiness mattered, but so did the truth. And sometimes, the truth needed to be revealed gently, yet unmistakably. I began by observing them more closely, taking mental notes of their routines, their conversations, their unspoken gestures. It wasn't about spying, it was about understanding. The patterns were subtle, the way she always answered his calls first, how she guided discussions about family matters without appearing controlling, how she positioned herself in photos, in moments, in our lives, like she was quietly claiming space. That afternoon, I decided to take the first step toward confrontation, not angry, not loud, but strategic. I asked her to join me in the kitchen under the pretense of teaching her my grandmother's recipe for chicken stew. She smiled politely, unaware that this was the first stage of the reckoning. As we worked side by side, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, I kept my tone calm, my movements deliberate. You know, I began, family is built on trust. Every small gesture, every shared meal, every conversation matters. Secrets can erode that foundation more than any argument. She looked at me, her expression guarded. I know, she said softly, but I sensed the words lacked conviction. I continued, measuring each syllable carefully. I found something yesterday, I said, reaching toward the envelope I had hidden in the pantry. Her eyes flickered, almost imperceptibly, the first crack in her composed exterior. I saw the photographs, the messages. I understand why you wanted privacy, but this secrecy has consequences. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the knife, and for the first time, I saw fear, not the kind that demanded sympathy, but the fear of being held accountable. I didn't think it would hurt anyone, she whispered. I just wanted to make him happy, to start quietly. I nodded slowly, stirring the stew as I spoke. Happiness built on secrecy isn't sustainable. It's fragile. And when it cracks, it doesn't just affect you and him, it touches everyone connected to him. Family, friends, those who love him. You've learned a hard lesson, but you need to understand the depth of what has happened. Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no dramatic outburst, no defensive tantrum. Just quiet acknowledgement. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes, confrontation wasn't about shouting, or forcing apologies, or demanding explanations. Sometimes, it was about creating a space where truth could be seen, recognized, and felt in its full weight. Later that evening, I spoke with my son privately. I approached it carefully, not with blame, but with honesty. I know about the wedding, I said. I know it happened secretly, and I know you were swept up in it. I'm not angry at you, I'm disappointed that secrecy has overshadowed our trust. We need to rebuild that, together. His eyes were wide, a mixture of shame and relief. Mom. I didn't know how to tell you, he said quietly. I thought it would be easier if we just handled it ourselves. I understand, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. But easier isn't always right. Transparency, honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, that's what sustains family. That's what keeps us strong. And as I watched him nod, a subtle weight lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't going to erase what had happened. I couldn't. But I could guide, correct, and ensure that the lessons were learned, not with anger, but with quiet, steady resolve. The following days brought a ripple through our family circle I hadn't anticipated. Once the quiet confrontation had occurred, the secret could no longer remain hidden. It spread, not through gossip or malice, but through the natural awareness that truth eventually demands attention. Family members began to ask questions, neighbors noticed subtle changes in our routines, and even casual friends sensed a tension that had been carefully contained for far too long. I watched her during those days, noticing the small shifts in her demeanor. The effortless composure she once carried had softened into something more tentative. She smiled, yes, but now there was an undercurrent of careful thought in every movement, a cautious weighing of consequences. The facade of absolute control had begun to crack, and the world around her was noticing. At a family gathering, the reality of the situation became more tangible. My sister-in-law asked casually, "So, when was the wedding?" "We didn't hear about it." Her words were innocent, but they carried the weight of social expectation, the subtle demand for honesty. My son froze for a heartbeat, and I watched my daughter-in-law's smile falter, that careful shield slipping for just a moment. I took a breath, keeping my tone calm and measured. "It was yesterday," I said, letting the words hang in the air. The room was silent for a moment, the ordinary chatter of family life replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of something previously hidden. She nodded, small and polite, and I could see the subtle realization on her face that her secrecy had consequences beyond our home. It wasn't about punishment, it never was. It was about accountability. And the consequences, though social and emotional rather than legal or dramatic, were real. Friends and family began to treat her differently, not cruelly, but with careful observation, a subtle recalibration of trust. Every gesture, every word, every smile was now measured against the knowledge of the secret she had kept. Even my son, though still loving and loyal, began to show subtle signs of reflection. He would pause in conversations with her, weighing his responses, his usual ease tempered by the recognition that life could no longer be compartmentalized into secrecy and spontaneity. Trust had been tested, and it would need to be rebuilt, brick by careful brick. During this period, I also noticed how our home itself seemed to respond to the truth being known. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread again, the hum of the refrigerator felt less like a backdrop to tension and more like a heartbeat of daily life. Laughter returned, albeit cautiously, as if even joy now needed a moment of consideration. The house, like our hearts, was adjusting to reality. I spoke to her privately one evening, after the family had dispersed. "This isn't about shaming you," I said gently. "It's about understanding that our actions ripple outward. Every choice we make affects more than just ourselves. You'll feel the consequences of your decisions, yes, But hopefully, it teaches you to act with awareness, care, and honesty in the future." Her eyes glistened, and for the first time, I saw a deeper understanding, a recognition that the calm, quiet life she had tried to craft for herself could not exist without respect for those around her. I understand," she whispered. And I believed her. Not because of the words alone, but because of the subtle shifts I saw, the hesitation in her movements, the thoughtfulness in her speech, the quiet reflection in her eyes. By the end of that week, the initial shock had passed. The secret, once explosive, had become a lesson, visible, acknowledged, and understood. And though the emotional scars lingered, they were tempered by clarity and the beginnings of renewed trust. Weeks passed, and slowly, the house began to feel like home again. The tension that had once tightened around every conversation, every glance, began to loosen, replaced by a cautious warmth. My son and his wife moved through the rooms with a quiet awareness, careful now with each interaction, as if the fragility of trust had taught them a new rhythm. I, too, felt the subtle shifts within myself. The heartbreak, the shock, the disbelief, all of it had left a mark, but it was no longer a raw wound. It had transformed into a quiet strength, a steadiness that came from surviving the tremor of betrayal and learning how to move forward without losing oneself. I found comfort in the ordinary, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint aroma of herbs simmering in a pot, the laughter of my son as he tried to teach her the right way to knead dough for our family bread. There were moments that reminded me of the fragility of life and the resilience of the human heart. One evening, I found her in the living room, quietly arranging flowers she had picked herself. She looked up, startled to see me, and I noticed something in her eyes, a soft humility, a reflection of the lessons she had begun to understand. I smiled gently. "They're lovely," I said. She nodded, and for a long moment, we shared silence. There was no need for apologies or confessions in that instant. The acknowledgement of past mistakes, combined with a willingness to grow, was enough. My son, too, showed signs of maturity I hadn't anticipated. He began to speak openly with me about his feelings, about the choices he had made, about the ways in which he had been caught between love and loyalty, excitement and responsibility. I listened, offering guidance where I could, and slowly, the emotional distance that had grown between us began to shrink. It was a gradual process, but the foundation of honesty was returning. We started rebuilding family traditions, small gestures that reaffirmed our connection. Sunday dinners became a sacred routine again, with laughter, chatter, and the clatter of dishes filling the spaces that had once felt hollow. The scent of baking bread, the warmth of shared tea, the comfort of ordinary routines, these became the threads that wove us back together. And yet, the experience had left an indelible lesson etched into our hearts. Secrecy, even when cloaked in good intentions, could erode the trust that binds family together. Love, patience, and honesty were the scaffolding on which strong relationships were built. Without them, even the smallest act could become a fracture. I found myself reflecting often on the quiet moments of revelation, the envelope on the couch, the whispered phone calls, the sudden acknowledgement of truth. Those moments, painful as they were, had shown me the importance of vigilance, empathy, and measured action. I had learned that confronting deception required both courage and composure, and that healing often comes not from punishment, but from understanding and careful guidance. As the days turned into weeks, I felt a sense of calm settle over our home. It was not the naive, unexamined calm of before, but a wiser, deeper serenity, the knowledge that mistakes could be acknowledged, consequences faced, and relationships rebuilt. The storm had passed, leaving us intact, stronger in subtle ways, and aware that the bonds of family are never unbreakable, but always worth protecting. Even now, when I sit in the quiet of my kitchen, the aroma of fresh bread lingering in the air, I think about that moment, the words she spoke, so casually, so confidently, "We got married yesterday." The shock, the disbelief, the ache of betrayal, they remain with me, but they no longer hold power over my life. Instead, they are reminders of the lessons learned, of the patience required to navigate the delicate tapestry of family, trust, and love. I look at my son sometimes, watching him with the same quiet pride I always have. He carries a new awareness now, a recognition that life doesn't hand out trust lightly, and that the decisions we make ripple far beyond our immediate desires. And as for her, she has become part of our lives in a more honest, careful way. The lessons she learned in secrecy now guide her actions, and I see glimpses of genuine connection, of respect for the bonds that she once overlooked. Healing, I've discovered, is not sudden. It is slow, measured, and requires both time and intention. The house has returned to its familiar rhythm, but now each laugh, each gesture, each shared meal carries a quiet understanding. Trust must be nurtured, honesty must be valued, and love must be steady enough to withstand storms. And as I reflect, I often ask myself a gentle, lingering question, one I now ask anyone who has faced betrayal or unexpected revelations. How do you respond when the foundations you rely on shift beneath your feet? Do you crumble, or do you find the strength to rebuild, wiser and steadier than before? Life is never simple, and family is never perfect. But in the quiet, ordinary moments, in the shared laughter over tea, in the gentle guidance offered to those we love, we discover the resilience of the human heart. We discover that even after secrets and mistakes, healing is possible, trust can be restored, and love, careful, honest, and true, can endure. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments. And if you found yourself thinking about the fragile, beautiful ties of family today, consider subscribing to hear more stories like this, stories that remind us all of the quiet power of truth, patience, and love. The house is calm now. The storm has passed. And for the first time in weeks, I feel a quiet peace.